Leading in Ministry is a video podcast designed to share anecdotal information that helps equip leaders in practical ways. Personal stories help drive the points home while making it both entertaining and informative.
Our special guest for the video podcast today is a longtime friend, Lane Lohman. And Lane, it is so good to see you today. How are you doing?
Doing very well, Don. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Lane, today I wanted to discuss the topic of dealing with the cultural shifts, especially in ministry, the ministry that you're involved in. But before we do that, I wanted to take a moment and just reflect, because before I knew you, I knew your father and mother, and your dad was an absolutely amazing person, a tremendous preacher, Dr. J. Harold Lohman. And tell me a little bit about him. Would you just help our audience to know who he was?
Well, growing up in the Lohman household with my dad and mom was just an incredible experience. My dad was bigger than life. He was on the road from day one of my life. He was an evangelist when I was born, although he did do pastoral work. And so I watched my dad, and it was amazing the influence he had on people. He would come in off the road and he would spend as much time as he could with us. Mother did most of the rearing of the 5 children. And occasionally we'd go with Dad, camp meeting. Our vacations were camp meetings in the summer. We'd go. Wow. My dad was booked. And so I grew up on campgrounds all across the Midwest. Some of the notable ones: Hollow Rock Camp, Sebring Holiness Camp, Sharon Center Holiness Camp. And just grew up hearing my dad preach, hearing the sermons again and again and again, and sitting there even as I grew older and learned to appreciate what Dad was saying, would weep and laugh and be inspired. I was converted under my dad's preaching.
Wow.
So that was pretty incredible as well.
So the very fact that today you're serving as an evangelist, but there's no question the shaping of your life really happened under his ministry to a large degree.
Oh, to the greatest degree, actually, because I took my lead from my dad. I learned so much from him, watching him operate as a full-time evangelist. I often tell people that my dad, one of the things my dad taught me among so many, he taught me how to put windows on my sermons so that people could see into what you're trying to say.
Oh, I love that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and Dad was a great storyteller and illustrator. He could illustrate by storytelling. And I learned that from my dad.
Yeah.
And he exposed me to some of the great pulpiteers of the holiness movement. And John Church, my names escape me right now, but Percy Trueblood, John Church, Tony Anderson.
Oh my. Well, I also know that back in the 70s, when we first started into evangelism, there was nobody that was more of a supporter of our ministry than your dad. And it makes me stop and realize that every one of us who are in ministry today had the fortune somewhere of that other person who believed in us. Yeah. And they helped to really catapult us into ministry. And thank goodness for those individuals who trusted us enough that they would help to put us out there and to just allow others to learn about our ministry. And he was a great gentleman, and we will always have a very warm spot in our hearts for him. Lane, I know you're in evangelism today, but take us back through your history a little bit. You haven't always been an evangelist. I think you've been a pastor. Just give us a little capsule of that.
Well, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I was converted at age 17 under Dad's preaching, as I mentioned. And when I was converted, I went off to John Wesley High School and Bible College. And while there, a junior in high school, traveling with a PR group as a singer. I was in a revival meeting, and during my devotions one night after one of the services in the parsonage where we were being entertained, I felt God put his hand on me and called me into the ministry specifically as an evangelist. And I knew I was called to be an evangelist. And so I went and told my dad just the week afterwards. And he said, son, I am so thankful for the call that you feel, but you'll never be an effective evangelist unless you pastor. And I learned what that meant later on, because being in the pastorate helped me develop a pastor's heart, so that when I would go in and preach and people had never heard me, and I wouldn't do damage. So there would have to be damage control after I left. And so that was one of the great pieces of wisdom that my dad imparted unto me. And then, of course, I rode my dad's coattails into evangelistic ministry.
Yeah.
He hired me. He hired me, paid me $50 a week to drive him to his revival meetings. And then he would get me up to preach in a youth meeting or have me sing. My very first paycheck as an evangelist was as a singer for my dad at Miami Central Church of the Nazarene in Miami, Florida in 1972.
Oh, my word. That's so amazing.
And so that got me started. And so I graduated college and went right into full-time evangelism in 1971, working with my dad. And then the doors began to open. And I was in evangelism for 10 years until 1981. And the Lord just said, you're getting too comfortable. I'm going to redirect you. Put me in a church in Nashville, Tennessee for 8 years. And it was an incredible experience. I had some things happen personally, spiritually, that took me to another level in my walk with the Lord.
Sure.
And then said, okay, I'm done with you there. I want you back on the road. And put me back on the road in 1989. And I traveled in evangelism again from 89 until 96. And then some things happened family-wise that took me off the road. And then I went back on the road again in 1999 and was on the road from 1999 until 2006, when things began to shift. You were talking about cultural shifts. Things began to shift. And I took a church here in Columbus, Indiana, where I presently live, and pastored for 4 years, and then went back on the road again, and here I am.
Wow. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the cultural shifts, because there's probably not an area of ministry in the church that has been impacted any more than that of the evangelist, with all the cultural changes that have happened and continue to happen. So why don't you tell me, what are some of the things that you have seen happen, and how have you responded to that? Because obviously, as leaders, we have choices of how we respond to circumstances, and I think that's a key to how successful we are as a leader, as to how we respond to those things. So kind of go into that for me a bit.
Well, in this kind of work, you cannot afford to stay static and do it the same old way you've always done it. Although the message, my preaching hasn't changed as far as my purpose and what I'm about, although you have to be flexible, and you have to, rather than just saying, I'm going to hold your revival and go in and just preach 5 sermons and say, well, dust your hands of that one and go on. You've got to be willing to say, all right, Pastor, what kind of theme you want? Do you want a theme? Do you want to do it one Sunday only, or you want to do it 3 days, or do you want to do it 4 days? How do you want to do this? And so you have to be flexible. And there are pastors who are clueless and I say this in all due respect, but there are pastors that just have no concept. I held a revival meeting just about 1.5 years ago in a church that historically believed in revival. And I'd been there I think I'd been there 4 times previous to this pastor coming in, and it had been booked by the previous pastor, and the church kept the meeting. And that pastor told me, he said, I don't know what a revival is. I've never been in a revival. You run into that. And you have another generation that's coming along that has no concept of what revival meeting is. And so you have to confront that, and you have to market yourself.
Yes.
You have to put yourself out there and say, this is what I do, and give them an avenue for seeing what you do and hearing what you do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll sit at home and you'll not have any meetings, and you'll have to find secular work. So.
Yeah, I think it was really a highlight that I want to make here to what you just said, because I do believe that for some evangelists, and having been associated with that aspect of ministry for a lot of years, we traveled full time for 25 years. I think there was a time when an evangelist sort of set the agenda, and the pastor just knew what it was that he was asking for when he would make that invitation. But I think one of the cultural shifts that you just mentioned is that all of a sudden you're asking the pastor what it is that he would like to have. Is it a one day? Is it several days? What is the theme? Because it's important that you're able to help connect with what the need is of that pastor.
Well, my friend Norman Moore, who is a full-time evangelist, wonderful evangelist, he says the church still needs revival. People still need to get saved. Believers still need to get sanctified, and the pastor still needs to be encouraged.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that. I mean, that just sums it all up.
Absolutely. Another thing that I think all of us are aware of, but the style of preaching has shifted. We talked about your dad. I mean, man, back in the 70s, the style of your dad was like amazing. It was more of the oratory effect of speaking. But that is not so much the style of today. What about you? Have you seen a shift in the style of how you deliver a message?
Yes, I have, because early on in my ministry, I was as high energy as my dad used to be.
Uh-huh.
And just hardly take a breath. I mean, you preach fast and straightforward, in your face kind of preaching. And I even had a little guy walk up to me after church one night years ago. He said, "Who were you mad at tonight?" And I had a doctor in a church in South Carolina. She had some kids sitting with her, and she told me, she said, I had one of those kids come up to me and say, "Hey, doc, somebody needs to put that preacher on decaf." And it was so different then. And now, as you get older, that has something to do with it.
Sure.
And as things change, you begin to shape your ministry a little differently as to how you preach. There's still that confrontive type style. I still have a confrontive type style. Jesus did.
Sure.
And I still use that, but it's not as high energy as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more team, I guess would be a good word.
More conversational at times.
I wouldn't say conversational, because that's more teaching to me.
Okay.
I think it's more what just the only word I can come up with is it's preaching.
Yeah.
Preaching.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the congregation and not just talking to the congregation.
Sure. Lane, let me ask you this. If there was one piece of advice that you could provide to evangelists that are doing that kind of ministry in the culture that we are now in, what would it be? What one important piece of advice? I hope I'm not catching you off guard with that, but.
Well, I think, and I've told people, men in particular, not so much the ladies, because I only know a few lady evangelists, but the ones who seem to come to me and say, "What advice would you give me if I want to go into evangelism?" I said, number one, you better be called.
Yeah.
It better be a calling. It's not just something I think I'd like to do, that kind of a thing.
Right.
You better be called, because if you're genuinely called, God will make sure that you have a place to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, be called. And I said, attitude is absolutely, you've got to have a servant attitude. If you don't have a servant attitude, you come in with an attitude, well, I'm going to do this and you got to do this for me. And I want this, and making demands if you come in and hold a revival meeting. We've had to live some of that down across the years. Not so much now, but the attitude, servant spirit is absolutely essential in what you do. And you've got to be able to read congregations. Every congregation is different. And you've got to somehow spend time with those people before church, Sunday school, however you do it, talking with the pastor. Every church has a personality.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to read that congregation. You just can't come in and preach your same 5 sermons every week and expect it to be effective.
Yeah. Yeah. And, let's just wrap it up and explore one other little area here today. And that would be the area of flexibility, I guess, because when I think about what we are experiencing right now with COVID, you have to be creative as an evangelist to be able to survive the circumstances that we find ourselves in during this pandemic. So tell me, is there something that you have done during this time to help adapt to a new culture, even with the COVID issue?
The short answer is not really. No. Second week of March was my last meeting, and I didn't work again until June. And so I took that time to restore my body, to rest. I took that time to read and listen. And I know some evangelists, they started doing online things, which was great. And I watched some of that, and that was good. Personally, I just didn't feel constrained to do any of that. Yeah. And it's amazing how the Lord opened up ways of us being able to stay in what we do without floundering financially.
Right.
I was absolutely amazed at the support we got from friends and churches. Churches where I was scheduled would send me the honorarium, even though I couldn't come because the meeting was canceled.
Yeah.
It was just amazing the way they rallied to the evangelist. And then, of course, when things began to open up, of course, I think I had a total of like 15 or 16 cancellations. And but yet God was faithful, and He always is, Don.
Yeah.
He's always faithful. And I've talked to other evangelists say the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think the beauty of it is that, God knows everything. And who knows? What a tremendous time for you to have a sabbatical. Not, a lot of pastors get sabbaticals. You don't have the luxury of that, but it happened.
Yeah, it happened, and I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the time at home with my wife. She doesn't travel with me every week, and doing things around the house, and just really took time to see God work. And it was amazing how God worked.
That is amazing for sure. Well, Lane, just know that Cheryl and I love you and your wife. We've enjoyed the various times that we've been able to do ministry together. Always enjoy that opportunity.
We do too.
And, I just wish you the very best as you continue to do evangelism in the church. Thanks again for taking time today.
I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day.
Thank you, Don. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment right now to hit share and include a comment.